For 10 years, she wiped up spilled wine and swallowed every humiliation. The day they finally sat her at the defendant's table, she smiled and told the jury she hadn't strangled a person. She'd strangled a mannequin. After those words, the world inside the courtroom cracked wide open. The courtroom smelled of wax and old wood. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow across the polished mahogany walls. Claire Ashford sat at the defense table, spine straight, hands folded one over the other. Not a single strand escaped the tight bun at the nape of her neck. Her gray eyes were cast downward, fixed on her fingers, pale, immaculately clean, motionless. She heard the rustle of papers, a cough from the back rows, the creak of the judge's chair. The world around her moved, breathed, waited. She remained still, like a museum piece displayed behind glass for public viewing. No fear, no defiance, only control. Absolute, mechanical, terrifying. The court is ready to hear closing argument. Judge Walter's voice was dry, stripped of emotion. He adjusted his glasses, swept his gaze across the room with the indifference of a man who'd seen hundreds of these cases. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a case number in the docket. The prosecution may proceed. Claire didn't flinch. Her breathing remained even. She heard several jurors shift in their seats. Reporters at the back of the room froze, pens hovering over notepads. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the final battle for a truth no one would ever see. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Harrison rose. The movement was smooth, unhurried. He didn't pick up a single sheet of paper from the table. His confidence spoke louder than any words could. Broad shoulders, square jaw, dark brown eyes that held not a trace of doubt. He walked toward the jury box, his shoes striking the worn marble floor with rhythmic, relentless insistence. He stopped, fixed each of the 12 with a direct stare, establishing dominance like a predator marking territory. The silence stretched. He owned that pause. Ladies and gentlemen, his baritone filled the room. This is a story as old as time itself. Claire tracked the movement from the corner of her eye as he raised his hand, pointing in her direction. She didn't turn her head. Her pulse remained steady, 60 beats per minute. She counted. Control through calculation. This is a story about envy, resentment, and ultimately, greed. A story about how the shadow wanted to take the place of the sun. The metaphor was trite, predictable. Claire noted it internally, her expression unchanged. Harrison was building his narrative on archetypes, simple, digestible, easy to absorb. Shadow and sun, evil and good. The system demanded clarity, and he was delivering it. The prosecutor began to pace along the jury box, his voice gaining strength with each sentence. Victoria Vandermeer, a name we've all heard. Philanthropist, patron of the arts, a woman who opened the doors of culture and charity to those who needed it most. Her penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't merely a home, it was a bastion of generosity, a place where ideas were born that changed lives. Claire pictured the penthouse, the glass wall that made the city look like a miniature model, cold marble floors beneath bare feet on those rare mornings when she arrived early, abstract paintings on the walls that cost more than her annual salary. Victoria standing by the panoramic window with a champagne flute, gazing down at Manhattan with the expression of a collector appraising her latest acquisition. And now, Harrison paused, let me tell you about another world. Queens, gray streets, tiny apartments, a life far removed from the glitter of Park Avenue. That's where Claire Ashford lived, quietly, invisibly. He spoke her name with a faint tinge of contempt. Subtle, barely perceptible. Professional. Claire remembered her studio. Order. Every book in its place. The architectural model on her desk, the only item that served no function. Her sanctuary. Her command center. He called it tiny, as if size were synonymous with worth. Claire Ashford worked for Victoria Vandermeer for 10 years, Harrison continued. 10 years as a personal assistant. Victoria trusted her, paid her, shared her world with her. And what did she get in return? He turned back to the jury. His voice dropped, became almost intimate. Resentment. Envy. Hatred. Claire curled her left hand into a fist, thumb tucked inside. She pressed down. Physical pain, barely noticeable, an anchor to reality. No one saw. She'd learned to hide even her coping mechanisms. Harrison approached the evidence table. Slowly, with theatrical precision, he pulled on latex gloves. He picked up a sealed plastic bag. Inside lay Victoria's pearl necklace. Claire stared at it. The pearls reflected the fluorescent lights, each bead appearing cold, perfect, lifeless. She remembered the sensation of those pearls in her hands. Smooth, cool, heavy. The weight of a symbol transformed into an instrument. This, Harrison said, rotating the bag so every juror could see, was a symbol of status, a symbol of beauty. But in Claire Ashford's hands, it became a weapon of cold, calculated hatred. His words were hammer blows, each one a nail in the coffin lid. The hand that wrapped these pearls around her benefactor's throat was not the hand of desperation. It was the hand of a killer. All eyes turned to Claire. She felt them on her skin like tangible pressure. 12 pairs of juror eyes. The judge, the reporters. Jasmine Chen beside her, frozen, waiting for a reaction. Claire gave none. Her face remained calm, serene, as if carved from stone. She didn't blink. Her breathing even, controlled. 61 beats per minute. Her heart had slowed. She saw several jurors exchange glances. The suburban housewife sitting in the front row pursed her lips, her face set in an expression of disgust. The young stockbroker in the second row leaned back, arms crossed over his chest, a posture of defense and condemnation. But the history teacher, an older man with gray whiskers, frowned, his gaze thoughtful, uncertain. Harrison sat down. A confident, predatory smile played across his face. He'd done his job. Simple, comprehensible narrative. The shadow killed the sun out of envy. The jury had been given a version they could easily accept. "The defense may proceed," Judge Walters announced. Jasmine Chen stood. The movement was quick, energetic. She was a head shorter than Harrison, thin, in a navy suit that hung slightly looser than it should. A few strands had escaped her bun. She looked tired, but her eyes burned with the fire of conviction. Claire watched her. Jasmine believed. That was her greatest weapon and her greatest blindness. "The prosecutor told you a simple story," Jasmine began. Her voice was quiet, but every word rang clear. She wasn't shouting, wasn't playing on emotions like Harrison. She spoke as if sharing a painful truth with friends. "Simple, like a fairy tale. But we're not in a fairy tale. We're in a courtroom where lives are shattered, and the truth is rarely simple." She approached the jury, not from a position of strength, but as if seeking understanding. "The truth can be painful, complicated, ugly. And today, I'm going to tell you the truth about 10 years of quiet hell." Claire saw several jurors straighten, their interest piqued. Jasmine wielded a different kind of power, the power of empathy. Victoria Vandermeer, Jasmine spoke the name without reverence, was not the saint the prosecutor described. She was a master of psychological warfare, a virtuoso of humiliation. Jasmine picked up a sheet of paper from the table. This is an excerpt from Mrs. Vandermeer's personal diary found in her office. I quote, "Today, E. wore that dreary gray dress again. Sometimes I think I hired a moth." Jasmine's voice trembled with barely contained anger. A moth. She called my client a moth. Not by name, not even by her full initial. Simply E. As if Claire Ashford weren't a person, but an inconvenient stain on her perfect life. Claire remembered that dress. Gray, plain, bought at a discount store. She wore it twice a week because her salary barely covered rent and subway fare. Victoria would smile at her with a cold, condescending smile every time she saw it. Never said anything aloud. She didn't need to. The look said everything. The prosecution's witness, Maria Gonzalez, a housekeeper fired by Mrs. Vandermeer, told you about the incident at the charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, Jasmine continued. You heard her testimony. Claire Ashford was standing with a tray of drinks. Victoria Vandermeer, smiling at her guests, casually knocked over a glass of red wine. It fell. Shattered. The contents spilled across an expensive Persian rug. Jasmine paused, giving the jurors time to remember. And Victoria Vandermeer said, "Oh, Claire, your clumsiness again. Be a dear and clean that up." Claire knelt before 100 of New York's most influential people and wiped up the spilled wine with a napkin. And Victoria stood over her and laughed. Coldly. Contemptuously. Claire saw the rug before her, the red stain spreading through silk threads, the burn in her knees from the pressure of marble floor, the silence around her, not of sympathy, but of witnesses embarrassed by someone else's humiliation. And Victoria's laugh, light, musical, as if nothing had happened. This wasn't a one-time incident, Jasmine's voice grew firmer. This was a system. For 10 years, Claire Ashford endured abuse. She was told she was worthless. Not with words. Words can be recorded, proven. No. With looks, gestures, silence. She turned to the jury. Imagine this. Every single day, for 3,652 days, you're told that you are nothing. Your identity is erased like writing in sand until all that remains is a function, a shadow. Claire watched the jurors. The suburban housewife no longer looked so certain. Her brows drew together. The stockbroker uncrossed his arms. The history teacher nodded, almost imperceptibly. And when Claire finally found a glimmer of light, Jasmine continued. When she met someone who saw her not as a shadow, but as a person, when they became engaged, Victoria Vandermeer decided to take that from her too. Jasmine approached the defense table and picked up another document. This is the testimony of David Rockwell, Jr., my client's fiancé. He testified that 2 weeks before Victoria's death, she invited him to a private meeting. There, she told him, "Claire is a sweet girl, but I must warn you, she has an unstable mind. She's been on the verge of a breakdown. I fear for both of you." Jasmine's voice shook with righteous anger. A lie. A cold, calculated lie designed for one purpose: to destroy Claire Ashford's last hope for happiness. And when Claire learned about this conversation, when she understood that Victoria was willing to destroy even her future, Jasmine fell silent. The pause was long, filled with pain. This wasn't greed, ladies and gentlemen. This was the cry of a soul pushed to its absolute limit. the cry of a person from whom they were trying to take the only ray of light in impenetrable darkness. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Several jurors now looked at Claire, not with disgust, but with something resembling pity. Doubt. Jasmine returned to her seat. She looked exhausted, but satisfied. She'd dismantled Harrison's simple narrative, created her own, complex, tragic, human. Claire sat motionless. Her hands remained folded, her face calm. She gave no tears, no sigh, no grateful glance to her attorney. Because Jasmine Chen was fighting for a person who didn't exist. She was defending a victim. And Claire Ashford was not a victim. She was an architect, and the plan was only beginning. The defense calls Claire Ashford to the stand. Jasmine Chen's voice rang out clearly, without hesitation. The courtroom froze. The rustle of clothing, muffled coughs, everything stopped, as if someone had hit pause. Camera shutters flared like a swarm of predatory insects hungry for the next spectacle. Claire rose. The movement was slow, measured. She wasn't rushing. Each second was a unit of control. Her hands rested on the table's edge, calm, motionless. She pushed off. One step, another. The distance from the defense table to the witness chair was no more than 15 feet. Gray marble floor beneath her feet reflected the dim glow of fluorescent lights. Each footfall echoed dully, somehow amplifying the silence. The jurors watched her. Reporters froze with pens above notepads. Even Judge Walters leaned slightly forward, as if his curiosity had overpowered his professional detachment. Claire didn't look at them. Her gray eyes were fixed on the back of the witness chair, a solid, unmoving point in space. An anchor. She wouldn't allow herself to see faces. Faces meant emotions, reactions, expectations. They created noise in her system, and right now she needed absolute mental silence. 6 steps. 7. She reached it, stopped before the chair. A bailiff, a middle-aged man with a lined face and tired eyes, approached her. In his hands he held a Bible, worn, heavy, with a leather binding. He extended it to Claire without a word. Claire placed her right hand on the book. The skin over her knuckles looked almost translucent under the harsh light. She felt the texture of the cover, cold, rough. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Her voice was even, not loud, not soft. No tremor, no strain. The word emerged clean, like the strike of a bell. It rippled through the room, and several jurors exchanged glances. The suburban housewife pressed her lips together. The stockbroker frowned. Claire lowered her hand, stepped away from the bailiff, and sat in the witness chair. She placed her hands on the armrests, spine straight, legs aligned. Her posture was perfect, almost mechanical. Not a defensive posture, not a defiant one. The posture of a statue. Jasmine Chen approached her. The attorney's face wore an expression of genuine sympathy. Warm, almost maternal. She leaned slightly forward as if creating an intimate space between them, walling off the rest of the courtroom. "Ms. Ashford." Her voice was soft, almost therapeutic. "Could you simply tell the jury what it was like working for Victoria Vandermeer?" The question was open-ended, a lifeline, an invitation to tell a story of suffering, to evoke sympathy. Jasmine waited. The jury waited. Claire saw in their eyes a readiness to listen, a readiness to understand. She paused. 3 seconds. Her gray eyes rested momentarily on Jasmine's face. The attorney believed. It was visible in every line of her body, in the tilt of her head, in her open posture, in her warm gaze. It was instructive, Claire said. The word landed between them like a cold metallic object. Not terrible, not humiliating, not unbearable. Instructive. A word stripped of emotion. The word of a researcher observing an experiment. Jasmine blinked. A barely perceptible shadow of confusion crossed her face. She opened her mouth to rephrase the question, but didn't get the chance. "Objection!" Marcus Harrison's voice rang out sharply. He rose from his seat, broad shoulders turning toward the judge. But his objection was perfunctory. He was already walking toward the witness chair, like a predator who'd caught the scent of blood. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine." Judge Walters nodded. "Proceed." Harrison stopped 6 feet from Claire. He looked down at her, using his height for psychological pressure. A condescending, predatory smile played on his lip. "Instructive?" he repeated, his voice dripping with poisonous irony. "Ms. Ashford, let's be direct. Victoria Vandermeer gave you a job others could only dream of. She brought you into a world you would never have seen otherwise." He paused, letting the words settle. "You must have been very grateful to her. Isn't that right, Ms. Ashford?" Claire looked at him. Not in the eyes. Her gaze slid across his left shoulder, the knot of his tie, the pen he held in his hand like a weapon. "I performed my duties, but you envied her." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, hurled like an accusation. "No. You hated her for how she treated you." "No." Claire's voice remained monotone. Harrison frowned. His strategy was simple. Break through her defenses, provoke an emotional reaction. Anger, tears, anything that would confirm his theory of an envious killer who'd lost control. But Claire gave him nothing. Her face remained calm, her breathing even. 62 beats per minute. Harrison raised his voice. "She humiliated you in front of dozens of people. You knelt on the floor, wiping up wine she spilled deliberately just to laugh at you. Tell the jury, did you feel hatred in that moment?" The mention of the gala at the plaza triggered a flash. Not emotion. Memory. It was always there beneath the surface of her consciousness, ordered, catalogued, ready for retrieval. Claire saw the scene. The ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, blinding. A sea of faces dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. Victoria Vandermeer in an emerald gown, pearl necklace on her throat catching the light. Claire standing by the wall with a tray of glasses. Invisible. Function. Victoria turned to her, smiled. A warm, dazzling smile for the guests. Her hand, elegant, impeccably manicured, glided toward the tray. A careless gesture. The glass of red wine tipped, shattered. The red stain spread across the beige Persian rug like blood. "Oh, Claire," Victoria's voice was light, musical. "Your clumsiness again. Be a dear and clean that up." 100 eyes turned to Claire. Not sympathy, embarrassment. Witnesses to someone else's humiliation. Claire dropped to her knees. The marble floor was cold, hard. She took a napkin and began to wipe. Red wine soaking into fabric. Victoria stood over her and laughed. Quietly, throaty, contemptuously. Claire returned to the present. 3 seconds had passed. She looked at Harrison. Her face remained calm. "I did my job, Mr. Harrison. I cleaned the stain." Several jurors exchanged glances. The history teacher frowned. The housewife clasped her hands together on her lap. The stockbroker shook his head. They saw the coldness, but they interpreted it as a defense mechanism, a survival strategy. Harrison decided to strike from another angle. "Fine." He paced in front of the witness chair, as if gathering his thoughts. Let's talk about another incident. You were 26 years old. You'd worked for Mrs. Vandermeer for 4 years. It was your birthday. Tell the jury what happened.
Claire didn't answer immediately. The memory was clear, catalogued. File number 347 in her mental archive. A cold winter evening, Claire arrived at work. Victoria stood by the penthouse window. In her hands was a box, large, tied with a silk ribbon. Designer logo. "Claire, darling." Victoria extended the box. "Happy birthday." Claire opened it. Inside lay a cashmere coat, gray, impeccably tailored, soft, expensive. The most beautiful thing Claire had ever held in her hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Vandermeer." Her voice was quiet. "Try it on," Victoria smiled. Claire put on the coat. It fit perfectly. She looked at her reflection in the panoramic window. For the first time in 4 years, she saw not a shadow, but a person. "Charming," Victoria said. "Though, of course, it would look even better if you dropped a few pounds. But never mind. Wear it." The smile on Claire's face didn't waver. She removed the coat, carefully folded it back into the box. "Thank you." She wore that coat for 3 winters. Each time she put it on, she heard Victoria's voice. "If you dropped a few pounds." Claire looked at Harrison. "She gave me a coat. I was grateful." "But she humiliated you with that gift," Harrison insisted. "She gave you a compliment and then struck you with criticism about your weight. You hated her for it." "No!" Harrison raised his voice. His patience was wearing thin. "Then let me ask you about the letter from your late sister. Tell the jury what Victoria Vandermeer did with it." Another memory. Claire entered the penthouse living room. Victoria sat on the leather sofa with 2 of her friends, women from her circle, dressed in designer clothing, champagne flutes in their hands. In Victoria's hands was a letter. The paper was crumpled. Claire recognized it instantly. Her sister's last letter, written 2 weeks before her death. The letter Claire kept in her bag because she couldn't leave it at home. It was the last proof that she'd once been loved. "Listen, girls." Victoria's voice was full of cheerful mockery. "This is so touching." She began reading aloud, mocking the words, distorting the intonations. Her friends laughed. Victoria tossed the letter on the table like trash. "Almost like real people write." Claire walked to the table, picked up the letter, smoothed it, folded it, put it in her pocket, said nothing. Now, in the courtroom, she looked at Harrison. "She read my letter. It was a violation of boundaries. I noted it and continued working." "Noted it?" Harrison couldn't believe her coldness. "She mocked the memory of your dead sister. You didn't feel hatred?" "No." "Anger?" "No." "A desire for revenge?" "No." Harrison stopped. His face reddened. Several jurors stared at Claire with growing bewilderment. Her composure was unnatural. It didn't fit either version, neither the victim nor the cold-blooded killer. He decided to strike one final blow. "All right, Ms. Ashford, then tell the jury, you killed Victoria Vandermeer because she threatened to destroy your engagement to David Rockwell, Jr." His voice thundered through the room. "She wanted to take away your only chance at happiness, at escaping your miserable life. That's why you killed her. Admit it!" The door was open. Wide open. Claire needed only to step through, to cry, to confess she'd acted in the heat of passion, to say Victoria had pushed her to the breaking point. The jury was ready to believe. Himself, Chen, sat holding her breath, hoping. Claire was silent. The seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15.
Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone in the back rows coughed. Harrison watched her triumphantly, expecting tears. Jasmine clenched her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. Claire slowly raised her head. For the first time during the entire trial, she looked Harrison directly in the eyes. Her gray gaze was cold, calm, analytical. There was no fear in it, no anger, no pleading. "You're wrong, Mr. Harrison." Her voice was quiet, but the words cut through the silence like a scalpel blade. Harrison faltered. His triumphant expression shifted to confusion. "What do you mean by that? I didn't kill her because of the threat." Claire turned her head toward the jury. She wasn't looking at them, but through them, as if addressing an invisible audience. By that point, it no longer mattered. I killed her in my mind 6 months before. That evening at the charity gala, when Victoria Vandermeer made me kneel and wipe up the wine she'd spilled, the room froze. No sound, no rustling. That day I looked at her laughing face and understood she wasn't a person. She was simply an empty space in a beautiful dress. The history teacher in the front row of the jury slowly leaned forward, his brows drawing together. The housewife's mouth fell open. The stockbroker went rigid. All the months after that, I simply worked for an empty space. And the night of the gala, I saw the pearl necklace on her throat and understood it didn't belong on an empty space. Pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence. I didn't strangle her in anger. I was simply removing jewelry from a mannequin. The courtroom erupted. A roar of voices, exclamations, rustling. The judge struck his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" Jasmine Chen stared at Claire. Her face was whiter than chalk. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth but uttered no words. Her eyes were filled with horror. Harrison stood motionless. For the first time in his entire career, he'd lost the power of speech. His pen slipped from his fingers and clanged onto the marble floor. Claire Ashford sat in the witness chair, spine straight, hands on the armrests, face calm. The door to acquittal through sympathy wasn't merely closed, it had been detonated. In its place arose a new, terrifying reality. And she had created that reality herself. The word mannequin hadn't yet dissipated in the air when the courtroom exploded. The sound was physical. A wave of voices, cries, the rustle of clothing crashed over Claire like a tsunami. Reporters leapt from their seats, notepads flying from hands. Cameras clicked, flashing like lightning in a storm. The front rows froze in shock. The back rows turned into a whirlpool of movement. Claire sat motionless, hands on the armrests, spine straight. Her gray eyes stared forward, through the chaos, as if she were watching a storm through thick glass. The history teacher in the front row of the jury removed his glasses, wiped them with the edge of his shirt, put them back on, removed them again. His face was white as chalk. The suburban housewife pressed her hand to her mouth. The stockbroker leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Order!" Judge Walter's voice cut through the din, but didn't silence it. He raised the gavel and brought it down. Once, twice, a third time. The wooden crack echoed off the walls, but the room continued to boil. "Order in this court!" Slowly, reluctantly, the noise began to subside. Reporters sank back into their seats, casting final glances at Claire. The jurors couldn't take their eyes off her. She was the center of this hurricane, yet she remained its motionless eye. Judge Walters stared at her. His brows drew together, his lips compressed into a thin line. "Ms. Ashford," his voice was heavy. "Do you understand what you just said?" Claire turned her head toward him. The movement was smooth, deliberate. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice sounded as calm as if she were confirming the time or her date of birth. The judge froze. For several seconds, he looked at her, trying to find any trace of emotion. Nothing. He looked away first. "We're in recess for 1 hour. Jurors, you're dismissed. Do not discuss what you've heard." He struck the gavel again. Once. Sharply. Marcus Harrison stood at the prosecution table. His broad shoulders were turned toward Claire. The first reaction flickered across his face. Shock, mouth open, gaze frozen. But it lasted 1 second. No more. Then his lips slowly stretched into a smile. Not broad, not open. Predatory, restrained, triumphant. He looked at Jasmine Chen, seated at the defense table. Her face was the color of old newsprint. Her lips trembled. Her hands, clasped together on the table, had gone white with tension. Harrison shifted his gaze back to Claire. His smile widened. He didn't hide it. He turned to his assistant, a young man in glasses, and clapped him on the shoulder. "Case closed," he said loudly enough for Jasmine to hear. "She just buried herself." The assistant nodded, but his gaze was uncertain. Harrison didn't notice. His world was simple and clear. Claire Ashford, insane, not guilty by reason of insanity. He'd won. His name would be in every newspaper tomorrow morning. District Attorney, Governor, Senate. All doors open. He gathered his papers, tucked his pen into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and exited the courtroom like a victor leaving the battlefield. Jasmine Chen didn't move. She sat at the defense table, her eyes fixed on the emptiness before her. Claire's words repeated in her head like a broken record. "I didn't strangle her in anger. I was simply removing jewelry from a mannequin." Mannequin. Empty space. Jewelry. Not the words of someone acting in passion, the words of someone else. Someone Jasmine didn't understand. But through the shock, another thought was breaking through. Thin, desperate, clinging to any possibility. Insanity. The word flashed in her mind like a lifeline. If Claire hadn't been aware of reality, if years of humiliation had broken her psyche so deeply that she no longer saw the difference between a person and an object, if she'd been so traumatized that she couldn't control her actions. Jasmine jerked her head up. Her breathing quickened. A plan. She needed a new plan. Insanity defense. Psychiatric evaluation. Expert testimony on post-traumatic stress disorder. Proof that Claire didn't understand the nature of her actions. This wasn't what she'd anticipated. But it was a way out. The only remaining way out. She looked at Claire. She sat in the witness chair, flanked by 2 bailiffs. Her face was calm. Too calm. Jasmine stood. Her legs trembled. She approached the witness chair. "Claire," her voice was quiet, breaking. "Let's go. We need to talk." Claire turned her head toward her, nodded. "Once." The bailiffs moved closer. One of them, an older man with gray whiskers, carefully took Claire by the elbow, helping her rise. She stood smoothly, without resistance. They headed for the exit. Claire walked between the 2 bailiffs, Jasmine following. The heavy courtroom door opened, and the corridor swallowed them. Sound crashed over them like a wall. "Claire! Claire Ashford! Do you think you're insane?" "What did you mean? Look over here!" Dozens of reporters lined the corridor. Cameras flashed. Microphones reached toward them like tentacles. Voices merged into a deafening roar. Jasmine instinctively stepped forward, trying to shield Claire with her body. "No comment," she shouted. "Back off." Claire didn't stop. She walked through this media storm with the same unshakable composure with which she'd sat in the witness chair. Her eyes looked forward, not at the cameras, not at the faces, at the door at the end of the corridor. One of the bailiffs cleared a path, pushing back particularly insistent reporters.
Back! Out of the way!
They reached the door. Wooden, massive, no nameplate. The bailiff opened it. Claire entered first. Jasmine followed. The door slammed shut. Click of the lock. The sudden silence was deafening. The room was small, suffocating. Gray walls, one particle board table with peeling edges, 4 chairs with cracked upholstery. A fluorescent light overhead hummed like a dying fly. The air carried the smell of stale coffee, dust, and despair. Claire walked to the table and sat. She placed her hands on the surface, spine straight, face calm. Jasmine stood by the door. Her breathing was rapid, ragged. She stared at Claire. Seconds stretched. 5, 10. Then something inside her broke. Claire, her voice collapsed into a whisper full of panic. "What have you done?" The words tore out of her like a scream. "You just signed yourself a life sentence in a psychiatric facility. Why did you say that?" Jasmine took a step forward. Another. Her hands trembled. "I was building a defense. I was creating a narrative that could save you. You were supposed to tell your story." Tears, emotion, sympathy. Her voice grew louder, more desperate. "And you tell them you saw her as a mannequin?" She stopped before the table, her dark eyes looking at Claire with pleading. "The jury thinks you're insane. Harrison thinks you're insane. The judge thinks you're insane." Claire looked at her, without blinking. 3 seconds. 5. Then she said, "Sit down, Ms. Chen." The voice was quiet, even, but it held steel. "Panic isn't part of our plan." The phrase hung in the air. Our plan. Jasmine froze, her lips parted. "What plan?" She nearly choked on the words. "Claire, what plan?" "The plan was to prove heat of passion." Claire slowly, almost regretfully, shook her head. "No." Her voice was cold, cutting like an icy blade. "Your plan was to evoke sympathy. My plan is to survive." Jasmine recoiled as if struck. She stared at Claire, and in her eyes the last spark of hope slowly died. In its place appeared something else. Fear. Incomprehension. The realization that she'd never controlled this case. "I need a pen and paper," Claire said. A simple, mundane request, but spoken with such certainty that it sounded like a command. Jasmine stood motionless. Her mind was trying to process what was happening. Claire, her client, the person she was defending, a victim. But now the roles had reversed. Claire was no longer asking for help. She was giving instructions. Jasmine mechanically lowered her hand into her worn bag. Her fingers found a notepad, a pen. She pulled them out and placed them on the table in front of Claire. Claire took the pen. Her hand was absolutely steady. She opened the notepad to a clean page, looked at it. 1 second. 2. Then she began to draw. Not write. Draw. Jasmine leaned forward, her breath caught. Lines appeared on the paper with mathematical precision, straight, even, flawless. Rectangles, arrows. Claire didn't use a ruler, but every line was perfect, as if drawn by a machine. First rectangle. Inside, a name. VVM Holdings, Cayman Islands. Second rectangle. Cyprus Investments, BVI. Third, Legacy Foundation Trust. Arrows connected them. Above each arrow, a date and amount. March 15th, 2024, $2, $3M. June 22nd, 2024, $1, $8 million. October 4th, 2024, $3, $1 million. Jasmine watched as a diagram was born before her eyes. Detailed, complex, merciless. This was a map of a financial pyramid. Over 2 years, Claire's voice was calm, methodical. Victoria Vandermeer transferred $23 million from the charitable foundation through a network of offshore companies to her personal accounts. Her pen continued to move. Another rectangle, another arrow. She used falsified invoices for consulting services from non-existent companies. She forged board member signatures. She fabricated expense reports. Jasmine couldn't breathe. She stared at the diagram and her world was collapsing. "I know this," Claire continued, "because I processed all these documents. I entered the data. I archived the files. I saw every transaction." She raised her head. Her gray eyes met Jasmine's gaze. 2 weeks before her death, Victoria Vandermeer learned that the FBI had begun an unofficial investigation into her foundation. Pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence. And she began preparing a scapegoat. Me. Jasmine sank into the chair across from Claire. Her legs no longer held her. Every document, every bank account access, every digital trail, Claire's voice remained even, was reconfigured to make me appear as the sole guilty party. All the passwords, all the signatures, everything led to me. Jasmine stared at the diagram, at the crisp, cold lines, at the dates, at the sums. This wasn't the work of a victim. This was the work of an analyst. The humiliations of the last months, Claire ran her finger along one of the arrows, weren't simply cruelty. They were part of her plan to create the perfect suspect. Psychologically unstable, embittered, someone who had a motive to commit not only murder, but financial crimes. Jasmine raised her eyes to Claire. Her face was whiter than chalk. You killed her too." "To survive," Claire finished. "If she'd stayed alive, I would have been arrested within a month." Fraud, document forgery, money laundering. 20 years in prison. Minimum. She placed the pen on the table. Her death was the only way to stop it. Jasmine stared at her. Her hands trembled. "But your admission." "The mannequin. You said it yourself." "Exactly," Claire nodded. "I said it." Her gray eyes were calm, cold, analytical. "Ms. Chen, tell me, if tomorrow the FBI walks into that courtroom and charges me with financial fraud, who will be their star witness?" Jasmine was silent. "Me," Claire answered for her. The woman who just publicly stated she doesn't see the difference between a person and a mannequin. The woman the jury, the prosecutor, and the judge all believe is insane. Pause. "What's the value of testimony from a madwoman, Ms. Chen?" Jasmine looked at her. Her breathing was ragged. Everything fell into place. The admission hadn't been a flash of madness. It was calculation. Cold, ruthless, brilliant. Claire had created a smokescreen, a story so irrational that it would completely discredit her as a potential witness in any future investigation. She wasn't defending herself. She was counterattacking. Jasmine lowered her gaze to the diagram, to the perfect lines, to the precise dates, to the cold logic. Then she raised her eyes to Claire's face. The person she'd been defending for months had vanished. In her place sat someone else, someone she didn't understand. Someone who saw 10 steps ahead while everyone else was still trying to comprehend what had just happened. You... Her voice trembled. You planned all of this? Claire tilted her head, an almost imperceptible nod. From the moment I understood she was setting a trap, Jasmine stared at her. The sympathy she'd felt for months was slowly transforming into something else. Cold. Frightening. Admiration. And horror. Ms. Chen? Claire's voice was quiet. You built a defense for a victim. Pause. 3 seconds. You should have built one for a winner. Jasmine Chen sat motionless. Her hands lay on the table. The diagram between them, cold, precise, irrefutable. Claire Ashford looked at her with gray eyes that held no fear, no regret, only calculation. The silence in the room was absolute. Jasmine Chen stared at the diagram. Her breathing was ragged. Her hands trembled. She ran her fingers over the perfect lines, over the dates, over the sums, over the arrows connecting offshore companies in a web of deceit. This wasn't the work of a victim. This was the work of a genius. She raised her eyes to Claire. Her face was white. My God. Her voice collapsed into a whisper. Claire. She stepped back. Her spine hit the edge of the table. This changes everything. The words flew out of her in rapid, panicked bursts. This isn't heat of passion anymore. This isn't an insanity defense. Now it looks like you killed her to cover up your involvement in fraud. Pause. Jasmine pressed her hand to her mouth. This is first-degree murder, Claire. Premeditated. Calculated. This is life without parole. Claire sat motionless, hands on the table, spine straight. Her gray eyes looked at the attorney without a shadow of fear. Jasmine saw that composure, and it frightened her more than any tears could. The villain had changed. It had ceased being Victoria Vandermeer's ghost. Now it sat directly before her. Cold, manipulative, brilliant. Jasmine pictured the courtroom. Marcus Harrison standing before the jury with this diagram in his hands, his voice full of righteous fury. Claire Ashford is not a victim. She's an accomplice. She killed Victoria Vandermeer to cover her tracks. She killed to save herself. The jury would believe it. Every one of them. The history teacher, the housewife, the stockbroker. They would see a monster masquerading as a victim. All the sympathy Jasmine had so carefully built over months would turn against Claire, would make her even more condemned, even more dangerous. The system Jasmine had tried to use for salvation was now poised to destroy her client with doubled force. Do you understand? Jasmine's voice trembled. If they find out, if anyone from the prosecutor's office sees this diagram, you're finished. She stared at Claire, expecting some reaction. Fear, despair, tears, nothing. Your analysis is correct, Miss Chen, Claire said. Her voice was even, calm, almost indifferent. That's exactly how the system would interpret these facts. Pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence, if it knew about them. The phrase hung in the air. Jasmine froze. Her brain was frantically trying to process what had been said. If it knew about them. Claire saw something. Something Jasmine couldn't see. Some detail, some angle, some logic hidden beneath the surface of chaos. I don't understand, Jasmine breathed. She took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists. Claire, why? Why the mannequin story, then? Her voice was breaking into a shout. Why admit you're insane if all this time you were... this? She waved her hands toward the diagram, toward Claire, toward all this cold, calculating brilliance she'd just discovered. Why destroy the only defense you had? This was the final question, the last attempt to find any logic in a collapsed world. Claire looked at her. Her gray eyes were calm, analytical. A shadow of something flickered in them, not triumph, not pity, simply acknowledgement that the moment of final explanation had arrived.
Imagine, Ms. Chen, she began, and her voice sounded like a professor delivering a lecture to students,
that I had told the truth. She folded her hands before her. That Victoria Vandermeer was a fraud. That she was going to frame me. That I killed her to save myself. What choice would the jury have had? Pause. Claire tilted her head, as if genuinely expecting an answer.
They would have seen before them either an accomplice who killed her boss to cover her tracks, or a liar trying to smear her victim. In both cases, the verdict? Guilty. Her voice was absolutely dispassionate. The truth was useless, Ms. Chen. The truth was a trap. Jasmine listened, and cold slowly trickled down her spine. Therefore, Claire continued, and in her gray eyes a cold, triumphant fire ignited for the first time. I needed a third story. Not monster and not victim, but something entirely different. Pause. 3 seconds. 5. I needed a madwoman. The word fell between them like an icy blade. Jasmine stared at Claire. Her breathing stopped. The mannequin story, Claire continued, isn't a defense. It's a weapon. It's a smokescreen so thick and irrational that behind it no one can discern any logic, any financial scheme. She ran her finger along one of the lines on the diagram. Think, Ms. Chen. Can an insane person who believes she's removing jewelry from a mannequin be a brilliant financial fraudster? The question hung in the air. Can she be a reliable witness in a federal investigation? Can her testimony carry any weight in court? Pause. No. Claire raised her gaze to Jasmine. My story makes me absolutely useless for any future trial regarding the Foundation. It nullifies me as a threat. It's my immunity. Her voice remained even, cold as a scalpel. I sacrificed my reputation to buy my freedom. Jasmine stood motionless. Her mind was feverishly reviewing the past months. Every meeting with Claire, every quiet answer, every silence. She'd thought she was defending a victim. But Claire had never been a victim. She was a player, a strategist, an architect. You calculated them all, Jasmine breathed. Harrison, the jury, me. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. You used their psychology against them, Jasmine continued, and her voice was full of involuntary admiration and horror. You gave them drama because they wanted drama. You gave them tragedy because they wanted tragedy. She looked at the diagram, at the perfect lines, at the precise numbers. You used your memory to remember all this. You used your intellect to calculate their reactions. You weren't just defending yourself. Pause. You created a new reality. Claire sat motionless. Her face remained calm. I created the only reality in which I could survive, she said. Jasmine looked at her client. The illusion had finally dissolved. Before her no longer sat a quiet, beaten-down secretary. Before her sat a grand master who'd calculated the game 10 moves ahead. She saw the years. Years of silent observation, data collection, analysis. She saw how Claire had stood in Victoria's shadow, invisible, recording every transaction, every insult, every detail. She hadn't broken. She'd hardened, transformed into something solid, sharp, merciless. The entire trial had been her chessboard. The jurors, her pawns. Harrison, her opponent. Jasmine,
her instrument. And she'd just declared checkmate to everyone. The mystery of Claire Ashford's identity was fully revealed. Not victim, not monster, architect. Her true motive, not revenge, but cold, logical self-preservation. Her brilliant strategy laid bare. She hadn't escaped the trap Victoria had prepared for her. She'd built her own, more perfect trap for the entire justice system. Her transformation was complete, from invisible shadow to master of her own reality. Jasmine sank into the chair across from Claire. Her legs no longer held her. Her hands lay on the table, powerless. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. She looked at Claire with a mixture of horror and involuntary, terrifying admiration. She'd lost the case in a way she couldn't even have imagined. But her client had won the war. The silence in the room was absolute. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Somewhere in the corridor, distant voices sounded, but they seemed part of another world. In this silence, Claire saw in her attorney's eyes complete understanding. She saw the moment when the last illusion crumbled. Her true portrait, the portrait of an architect, was finally complete. Seconds stretched. 10, 20. Claire looked at the diagram, at her work, at the proof of Victoria's crime that would never be used against her. Because the testimony of a madwoman carries no weight. She raised her gaze to Jasmine Chen, her attorney, her final witness. Ms. Chen? Her voice was quiet, calm, without a trace of triumph. You built a defense for a victim. Pause. 3 seconds of absolute, chilling silence. You should have built one for a winner. The words settled between them like a verdict. Jasmine Chen stared at Claire Ashford, at the quietest person in the room, at the most dangerous, at the architect. Silence.